Hello everyone, welcome to your first lesson of attachment. Today we're going to be looking at Caregiver-Infant Interactions, so grab your textbooks, grab your notes and your pen. This is everything that's on the specification for the attachment topic. So today we're looking at Caregiver-Infant Interactions in humans, so Reciprocity and Interactional Synchrony. Then we go on to look at stages of attachment. We look at multiple attachments, the role of the father. After that, we're going to go on to look at some very famous animal studies of attachment, so Lorenz and Harlow. We then look at explanations of attachments, including learning theory and Bowlby's monotropic theory. And then we go on to the strange situation. So types of attachment, we look at cultural variations in attachment. Then we look at the theory of maternal deprivation, and look at a very famous study which some of you might have heard of, the remaining orphan study. And then finally we look at the influence of early attachment on childhood and adult relationships. So it's quite a long topic, but hopefully one that you will enjoy. So as I mentioned, today we're looking at caregiver interactions. So we're going to be looking at imitation, reciprocity, and interactional synchrony. And we're going to be looking at a lot of research. So by the end of this lesson, not only will you be able to define these terms, but you'll be able to describe the research relevant to each of these definitions. So firstly, just as a bit of an introduction to attachment, I want you to think about which one of these faces do you find the most attractive? 1, 2, 3, or 4. So these faces were made by morphing an adult woman's face with an average child's face, obviously on the computer and not in real life. So the average child's face was made by merging 4 photos of children, and then that average was then morphed to this woman's face. This face is 50% child, 50% adult. This one is 30% child, 70% adult. This one's only 20% child, and then this one is just 100% adult. So which one did you find the most attractive? So this was an actual study, and only 9.5% of participants rated the totally adult face as being the most attractive. So the 4th picture. Most participants preferred a female face that displayed 10 to 50% childlike proportions, and there's a reason for this. Basically, it's called the baby face hypothesis, which means that we're more attracted to these big eyes, large forehead, squashed up nose sort of faces, and this links to attachment because these features in children that all babies have and all baby animals have act as a trigger for parenting behaviour, which is a necessity for a young animal's survival. So basically, because they look so cute, their parents just want to look after them and want to care for them. And so this spills over to how we judge adult faces, and this is called the baby face overgeneralization hypothesis. This isn't part of the spec, so you don't need to worry about knowing this. I just thought it was interesting. And as you can see in lots and lots of movies, they've built on this, and they've built on this baby face hypothesis to make you love all of these different characters with the big eyes and big foreheads and squashed up nose. And that's how they make them look so cute. Okay, so as a starter to caregiver interaction, I want you to think about, who do you have an affectionate bond with? So you might say your parents, your siblings, your friends, you might have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And in terms of this, then what do you think attachment means? I want you to pause me and just think about it. Attachment is defined, and I want you to write this down, is defined as the close emotional, reciprocal relationship between two people, which involves a feeling of well-being and a desire to be close. Reciprocal means that the behaviour is reciprocated, so one person does one thing, the other person does the same. And we're going to be looking at this in a little bit more detail. So in terms of attachment in infants, and an attached infant will show a desire to be close to their attachment figure and show distress when separated and pleasure when reunited. And generally this tends to be the mother, but there's a lot of importance on the father as well, and then secondary caregivers like grandparents or aunts and uncles or friends. I want you to try and list 3 behaviours or characteristics that demonstrate attachment. So you might think of a younger sibling, how are they attached to your parents? You might think of a baby, how do they show that they are attached to their caregiver? First one that I want to think about is proximity. So children who are attached want to remain physically close to those that they are attached to. You might know a clingy baby that is only happy when their mum holds them. So obviously with Ezra, I experienced this. When you try and put a baby down to sleep, they will cry because they need that proximity. They need to feel that security. They experience separation distress. So they feel this when the attachment figure leaves their presence. And they experience secure-based behaviour when they return to their attachment figure whilst playing. So the mother then comes in the room and they're quite happy to just carry on and play as long as that caregiver is in the room. So obviously we know that a caregiver is anybody who looks after a child. But what is an infant? So infant comes from the Latin word infans, which means without speech. So infancy is the period of a child's life before the speech begins. And it's usually just the first year of life, although sometimes it is the second year as well. And within this time, non-verbal communication is crucial to form this basis of attachment between infant and caregiver. So that means that the more sensitive an infant and adult are to each other's signals, the deeper that relationship is going to be. Our first key term for this lesson is reciprocity. And Jaffa et al. Demonstrated this, and he showed that infants coordinate their actions with caregivers in a kind of conversation. Obviously not always verbal, because babies can't speak, but it is this idea of turn taking, just as adults do in a conversation. So you say something, you wait for the other person to respond, then it's your turn to speak again. Babies and caregivers do this from birth. So you might pull a funny face at a baby and wait for their response, see what they do. And it can also be verbal. So you can go goo goo gaga to a baby, wait for them to do whatever they're going to do. In Spanish, we don't say goo goo gaga, we say garlic. But obviously in Spanish, so we go ajo, ajo, and then the baby will eventually go like ajo. It's pretty cute. Anyway, from birth, babies move in a rhythm when interacting with an adult. So one person leans forward and speaks, in quotation marks, because it's not always speaking, and the other person then waits their turn. And it's this interaction between them. This is what reciprocity is. So Brazelton investigated this as well, and he suggested that this basic rhythm is an important precursor to later communication. So we can basically predict how a baby will communicate in future based on how they are as a baby. How regularly the infant signals something allows a caregiver to plan an appropriate response, which leads to the foundation of an attachment forming. Second key term is this idea of interactional synchrony. And these baby faces absolutely kill me. Look at that first one with its tongue sticking out. I actually can't cope. But this famous study was done by Melstoff and Moore, and they found that infants as young as 2 or 3 weeks old imitated specific hand and facial gestures. And we're going to look in a little bit at how they actually conducted this experiment. They also then demonstrated synchrony with infants as young as 3 days old. And they concluded that the behavioural response must be innate. Because babies as young as 3 years old were doing it, it can't be a learnt behaviour. It must be something that we're born with. The study was conducted by using an adult model, so the guy at the top, and he displayed one of 3 facial expressions or a hand movement where the fingers moved in a sequence. A dummy was placed in the baby's mouth before the initial display to prevent any response from them. And then the dummy was removed and the baby's expression was filmed on a video. So this was an observational research. And I want you now to go to page 70 in your textbooks and answer the following 2 questions. And make some brief notes about Melstoff and Moore. So how did they conduct their observation? What was the method? And what techniques did they use to ensure the observations were reliable? And were the observations reliable? So have a go at answering those. And press play when you are ready. So the method was a controlled observation. So as I just mentioned in the previous slide, the model did 3 faces and one hand gesture, and they recorded the infant's response. So the observers watched videotapes of the behaviour in real time. Then they watched them in slow motion and frame by frame if that was necessary. The videos were judged independently by an observer who didn't know what the infant had seen. So they hadn't seen the male model. They were just looking at the baby's face and observing what they saw based on the following categories. So they recorded every time there was a mouth opening, a termination of mouth opening, tongue protrusion, so sticking your tongue out basically, and then termination of tongue protrusion. And each observer scored the tapes twice, and this meant that they calculated intra and inter-observer reliability. So intra being the same observer, and inter-observer reliability, whether 2 observers found the same behaviours. And they did. They found scores of 0.2, which, as we know from correlational research that we've done in research method, that's a really, really good correlation and a really strong inter-observer reliability, which can be used as an evaluation issue. Our third and final key term is this idea of imitation. So we all know that imitation means to copy behaviour, but we want to investigate whether the imitation that babies do is real or if it's pseudo. So pseudo means fake. So again, Melstoff and Moore proposed that imitation between infant and caregiver is intentional. It's real, it's innate. They believed that we were born with the ability to imitate. However, Piaget says that true imitation only occurs at the end of the first year, and anything before that is something he called response training. So he believed that babies repeat a certain behaviour for a reward. So it's basic operant conditioning. You do something, you receive positive reinforcement in the form of a smile or a laugh, and then the baby will do it again because it liked the reaction that it got. So Piaget believes that it's pseudo-imitation. He didn't believe that babies were consciously translating what they see into a matching movement. He believed that babies just copy the behaviour for a reward. However, there is more evidence to support Melstoff and Moore's idea of this real imitation from Murray and Trevathan. Trevathan, however you pronounce that. So their study looked at 2-month-old infants, and they first interacted via video monitor with their mothers in real time. So the mother would do something, the baby would interact with it, then the mother would do something else. So this idea of reciprocity. And then the video monitor then played a clip of the mother, so the image on the screen was not responding to the infant's gesture. So it wasn't in real time the second time. It was just a pre-recorded clip of the mother. So there wasn't that interaction between mother and baby. And this actually caused distress in the infants. And they eventually just turned away from the monitor because the attempt at attracting the mother's attention had failed. So this supports this idea of real imitation, because the infant wants to be an active participant of this interaction between the mother. And so Murray and Trevathan thought that this behaviour is intentional and therefore it's innate, we're born with it. So that's everything for this lesson. As 2 plenary questions, from the lesson that you have learnt, what advice would you give to expectant parents as a result of this lesson? And what are the 3 most important keywords from this lesson, and what do they mean? So have a go at noting those down. As always, please submit your notes onto Teams. Any questions, let me know.